Hi, I'm Sycra, and today I'm going to be doing a critique of one of the works posted by one of the forum members over at the Sycra.net forums. Alright, so here we have a picture of a knight, or a mage, or I don't know. He's got a lot of stuff going on here, and he's coming into a cave, and he has like a glowing staff. And there's a rabbit. I'm assuming this is a rabbit. And it's raining outside, and yeah, he's got a pouch. So, it's definitely creative. There's a lot going on. And I guess I could talk about drawing, and maybe I could talk about colors, but what I really want to talk about in this one is material. And so, if we just look at the image, you'll notice that there's a lot of different materials here, but they're all kind of treated the same. You've shaded this glowing thing the same way as you've shaded the skin and the armor. Now, I see you've added some difference to the armor, a little bit of highlight to make it look somewhat metallic. And you've done that here, and you're using... not sure, you're using kind of patterns, I mean, it's not really working as far as I see right now. Maybe on the rope it's okay, but things are just kind of, you know, fighting. There's a lot of different things going on. So I think the first thing I would do, if you weren't even going to think too much about, you know, painting, if you wanted to keep it somewhat cell shaded, because it does look like you're going for a somewhat cell shaded style, until I look into the background and I see the rain, which is a bit more painted. But let's say you're going to do it all cell shaded, then I really would just do that. I would just, you know, get the colors and just kind of block them in. I'm gonna put in a background real quick. So I think your background might be a bit dark, so I'm just gonna lighten that up a little bit, and then pretty much just block in the different tones. A bit darker. And again, I'm not going to focus too much on the lighting itself, and like color and stuff. And I'm not going to paint the whole thing. I'm just going to show you kind of an example of how you could do things. So let's say you're keeping it somewhat cell shaded. Then something like this, where it's pretty minimal. You got, you know, kind of hints of what the things are, but not going too detailed. That might work a bit better. And then you could just have very simple shadows. But I'm just going to assume that maybe you were going for a more painted look. And I'll just approach it as if that was the case. So, the first thing is to understand that different materials are lit differently, or react to light differently. So, I'm going to make a sphere. And I'm going to fill it with just a gray. And just going to shade it. So let's assume the light. Well, let's look at your situation. The light's kind of coming from the side here. Maybe, I don't know, it's a bit confusing. But it seems to be coming from this side. And you've got some light coming from this green mage staff thing, and maybe a little bit coming from the background. So I'm just going to treat it that way. So I'm just going to shade this sphere, and now this area that's lit is the light side, of course, and the opposite's the shadow side. Where the light meets the shadow, that's called the terminator, and then the shadow becomes the core shadow right here, which is going to be the darkest area of the shadow. So just going to get that in. And all right, so here we have like a sphere, and it doesn't have too much material value. You can't really tell what material it is. It's definitely matte. So maybe something, I don't know, something like clay a little bit could be. And this kind of works, this is close to skin, the material that you'd have with skin. So there's not too much, you know, going on in this. It's pretty simple. You might have a bit of a highlight. But it's going to be fairly soft and a bit spread out. Okay, so that's one material. Now you've got metal parts as well in here. So you have to be able to tell the difference between a metallic surface and like a more matte surface. So just going to go back to this because something's bothering me about the way I shaded it. Wasn't very good. Just want to smooth that out a bit. And okay. All right, so let's say this is now metal. Well, what's going to happen with metal? Well, things are going to reflect a lot more. So you're probably going to get a reflection of the environment. Things might get a bit more dark. And there's going to be more of a difference between, like this is a very smooth transition between light to shadow. This might be a bit more solid. And then you'll kind of get some banding going on where the different values kind of separate. And your highlight's going to be much sharper and brighter. And you're going to get placement, it's a bit wrong. You're going to get a lot more reflected light. So you'll have some of this behind kind of lightening up. And now this is starting to look a little bit more metallic. Something else that happens is because it's reflecting the environment around it, you might get areas where, let's say for instance there was a bright object there, you might get that reflected in this surface. There's some darker areas, you'd get those reflected. So there's a lot more in a metallic surface. But the important thing to remember is, you know, the values are more spread out compared to like skin, where the values are closer together and you don't get so much reflected light. So now when we deal with this, we can kind of apply that. So with, let's just put in like the red of the cape. So usually when you have red, you don't get such strong highlights the way you have them. And the value tends to be pretty dark. I can get a bit more saturated. And how do you figure out, what material is what? Well, the way to go about it is really to study. So look at different materials and then look at the, like, okay, let's say I've got a red, something that's red, and it's in an environment. And there's also other stuff in the environment. I would look, because they all have the same lighting, so I would look at the objects and just try and see, what do the highlights look like on like a red towel or something compared to maybe there's like a marble countertop, and then what do the highlights look like on that? And I'll try and make mental notes. So already just by getting rid of that highlight, and I'm just darkening the shadows a bit more, it's starting to look more convincing as a surface texture. You can get pretty deep shadows in red things. Let's say this was a more reflective material, you might get some higher highlights. But it's not going to be, it's going to be a bit spread out. It's not going to be like little dot lights where you have those like the lights on the eyes and stuff. Those are specular highlights when it gets really bright. So something like that. And then for the skin, you can keep it more subtle. So the first thing you want to do is you want to figure out what's the color itself. So first you just block it in kind of as if it's cell shading. Then the next thing you want to figure out is what material is it? And that's going to let you know how you're going to treat it. So is this a matte material or is it very reflective? If it's a matte material, there's not going to be really sharp highlights on it compared to a reflective material, and the values, especially the transition between light and shadow, is going to be a lot more soft. And then you want to figure out where's the light coming from. And the way you've done all these muscles, it's not really considering the light too much. And there's a lot of, I don't know, variation and shine, and some of the muscles here seem made up, but yeah, you want to think of it more simply. And skin is pretty hard as a material in order to paint it. There's a lot that goes on. And there's going to be a lot going on in terms of also the different lighting, how that's going to affect things. So let's deal with some of this metallic surface. So I want to find out where's the light and where's the shadow. So where's that point where it goes from light into shadow? And let's say this is gold. Well, on gold, you get a lot of reflection, the same as with any other shiny metal. The thing is with, let's say, chrome, when you get reflections in chrome, or steel as well, you see the same colors as whatever's, so if you've got like a blue sky, you'll see the blue sky reflected in the chrome and it will look blue. With gold, it doesn't carry the color so much. It will take the value, but it will still be somewhat yellow. So that's something to keep in mind. So, like maybe it's going to reflect the arm in here. So you're going to get some of that. And it might reflect some of this red as well in here. And then this is going to be in shadow because it's not getting hit by light, because it's underneath this hood. So you gotta remember stuff like that too. Where's the light coming? What part would it hit? What part wouldn't it hit? And then you're gonna get pretty bright highlights. So Just putting in some highlights, and already it's starting to look a bit more like gold and not just I don't know, like a shiny yellow. And I'm assuming you were going for gold. I don't know if you're actually just going for yellow, then, you know, that doesn't apply. But if you were going for gold, then this should work. And I'm kind of saturating the color before it turns into the shadow, so it gets more saturated. And maybe I'll add a few more dark areas where it gets quite dark in the shadow. And then you can get, you know, some reflections of other stuff going on as well. So we've got gold, and can do some stuff with the skin. Can add some light area on the skin. Now again, skin's not going to change in value. Usually it's not going to change that much, so you don't have to do too much in terms of a value transition. And with the gold, I could also add some brighter specular highlights in places. And this can be white where it gets really bright, you know, but just keep them small, the highlights. And you want to stay away from saturated colors the way you have them. It gets a bit unrealistic, so if, like, I have this color wheel, but if you're just using this color picker, you know, be careful about all these really saturated colors, especially when you use them all together. So, like, you know, coloring the red is something like this, and then the yellow, and just all in this area. At the same time, you don't want to always go desaturated, but you want a variation. You want to kind of understand how things work. So again, the way to learn that is really from studying. That's gonna tell you a lot about how things work. Just you know, opening your eyes and really looking carefully at the world around you and what's happening. We can desaturate that. And do studies from life as well. And photos can work as well, but you know, either one. I think life's a bit better to work from. I mean, it's a lot better, but photos aren't bad either. You still can learn a lot about, you know, how materials act, and things like this rabbit. It's white, but it's still going to get shadows. So let's bring back this ball, and let's assume this is like a rabbit now. So yeah, there's going to be like light, because I'm guessing this is, oops, this is a white rabbit. It's going to be lighter areas. But then it's still going to get, you know, darker in the shadow. There's still going to be a difference between that. And then gonna just create a bit of an edge to this to represent like the hair. And if light's hitting this, it might go into this as well. Like it might travel, because it's just touching the hairs that are poking out. So you might get something more like this, and then you might get some reflected light back here as well. And I'm not going to go into too much detail, but you know, gets more like a furry look to it. So yeah. Doesn't have to be pure white. It can have areas that get pretty dark where the light doesn't reach it. But then if you did want to make it, you know, pretty bright white, you could do that as well. But just keep it in the light areas. And if you start painting above your outline, you can, you know, if you want to make this more painterly, then I would recommend eventually going outside of the outline so that you're not painting on the lines, and then you'll be able to get a bit more like textural stuff because there's not a black outline around objects. So I think the main point has been gotten across in terms of, you know, really paying attention to materials. And then when you do think about lighting, like let's say this this glowing thing, you can think about, you know, just how that light actually is. I'm just going to add a bit of dark, and then can kind of light that up, and then maybe that does, you know, bounce off things the way you have it, but it might not be quite so strong. And then you're also going to get fill light, which is light from the background coming in. So, you know, this whole area might get a bit of that background color to it. It's also adding a bit of atmosphere and making this character come forward. And then you can go ahead and darken things the way you had it, you know, around the edges, so that the character still stands out. And then you have this kind of mysterious dark background. And you also want to think in terms of a three-dimensional space. So, like, let's say you've got this this green orb thing, and could give it, you know, just actually make it so it lights up the air around it. And maybe it fades off pretty quick, and you kind of have that too, where the light fades pretty quickly. But then you could have it, you know, catching on some things. So let's say there's some rocks that come closer, and then those kind of get lit up by this. Some other parts can get lit up. So it just feels more like an environment, that it's not just, you know, flat and they're not all on the same plane, that there is a bit of, you know, area that comes in front. But that's a bit more into painting. I wasn't really going to go too much into that. Except maybe, you know, just adding, you could add a bit of rim light coming from the background on him. And it's not going to show up so much on skin, so I just put it in, and then I paint the skin over pretty lightly so I can blend it, so it's, you've got a bit of a hint of that color, but it's not really strong. And then maybe for the glowing eyes, can get pretty dark underneath this helmet. Maybe there is a bit of, you know, light bouncing around, so maybe there does lighten up in some parts because it's gold and it's, you know, reflecting off other areas. Maybe it's reflecting from down here. And then by keeping this dark, then if you do want to put in that the glowing eyes, I'm assuming these are glowing eyes and not just because they're pretty bright white, then it's going to stand out more, and you don't even have to go to pure white. You can even just use, you know, maybe an off-white, and it will still read like it's glowing. And I wasn't really able to see the drawing too much, so just zoom in and fix that. And I mean, real quick, when you have like this flower thing on his head, I'm assuming that's a flower, sometimes it's lit a bit differently because it'll get light, and then where the light hits it tends to get more saturated, but you sometimes get like a lighter rim around it. So something maybe like, let me use a soft brush. You can get something like that, where it gets a bit lighter, and that makes, you know, a bit more of that flower look. And it never really gets too dark because there's a lot of bouncing light going on, and some of this light actually goes through because flower petals are somewhat transparent. So anyway, so that's pretty much it. And yeah, pay attention to materials. It's very important. And if you can't, then just do it more simple. You don't have to go this complicated. You don't have to be, you know, doing all these little, I don't know, looks like you're trying to be all stylistic about it, but it doesn't really work. So yeah, keep painting.